Snow fell without mercy across the frozen expanse of Arcadia, each flake another layer in an endless burial shroud that seemed determined to swallow the world whole. The continent had become a realm of eternal winter, where survival itself was an act of defiance. Somewhere deep within that white wasteland, near the borders of elven territory, the silence of the snow was shattered by the roar of war. What had once been pristine, untouched landscape was now stained with the chaotic colors of battle, dark crimson spreading across the white canvas like ink spilled on paper. The orcs had come in numbers that seemed endless, a tide of green muscle and iron crashing against the walls of the elven fortress. High above on the stone ramparts, elven archers stood with pale faces, their expressions carved from desperation and exhaustion. Their fingers bled from pulling bowstrings, loosing arrow after arrow into the horde below. Each shaft found its mark, but still the enemy surged forward. The elves knew with terrible clarity that if those gates fell, everything they loved would be consumed. So they held their ground, breath hitching in frozen lungs, watching the massacre unfold beneath them with hearts heavy as stone. Below the towering fortress walls, the battlefield had descended into something worse than chaos. It had become a slaughterhouse. At the center of that carnage stood Graxar, the Orc Lord of the Grey Wasteland tribe, moving through elven soldiers with terrifying efficiency. His massive blade rose and fell in brutal rhythm, cleaving through armor and bone as easily as a farmer's scythe through grain. Each swing left another body crumpled in the blood-stained snow. Around him flickered a faint crimson aura, pulsing with malice and hunger, a visual promise of the devastation he carried in every strike. His presence alone was enough to drain the courage from those who faced him. He stood over the corpse of a freshly killed soldier and laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed off the stone walls. He mocked the elves, calling them pathetic, asking if they truly thought their frail bodies could stop him. The remaining foot soldiers trembled where they stood, legs shaking, hands white-knuckled around their spears. They were trapped between duty to their homeland and the primal terror radiating from the Orc Lord. An elf archer on the wall gritted his teeth, eyes stinging from wind and the sight of slaughter below. Watching the red aura twist around Graxar's form, he realized with sinking dread that this was the legendary warlord himself, Graxar of the Grey Wasteland. Then, cutting through the rhythm of Graxar's dominance, an orc soldier came sprinting toward him, face twisted in panic. He shouted that there was a surprise attack. Humans were striking from the rear. Graxar's mind raced. The only human stronghold in the region, Lunar Fortress, had already been captured. He had crushed them himself. The humans were supposed to be broken, scattered, leaderless, so who could possibly be launching a counterattack now? The information didn't make sense, and that uncertainty clawed at the edges of his confidence. Far behind the orcish lines, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Kevin moved through the deep snow with unnatural grace, his eyes sharp and focused, scanning the battlefield like a hawk searching for prey. He wasn't trudging or struggling, he was gliding, his movements so fluid it seemed as though the snow itself was bending to his will. He was using seilin's martial arts, the technique Dmitri had taught them before their march. It was a discipline that allowed warriors to harmonize with the frozen environment, to become one with the blizzard rather than fight against it. Kevin and the other Dmitri soldiers appeared seemingly from nowhere, their silhouettes materializing out of the white storm like vengeful spirits. They struck without warning, blades flashing in the pale light, cutting down orcs with surgical precision before vanishing back into the swirling snow. The orcs at the rear turned at the sound of screams, just in time to see their comrades fall and the attackers disappear as if they had never existed. There were no footprints, no trails. The snow remained smooth and untouched where the humans had stood moments before. The surviving orcs stared in disbelief, a creeping dread settling over them. These weren't the weak, desperate humans they had expected. These were something else entirely. Warriors from beyond the endless mountain range, perhaps, or spirits given flesh. A sense of unease spread through the orcish ranks like poison in water. Moments later, the Dmitri soldiers struck again, emerging from the blizzard to kill several more orcs before vanishing once more. Watching from a distance, the lunar warriors, men who had struggled just to survive the snow, looked on in stunned amazement. They had never seen humans fight like this. It was as if the storm itself had taken their side. From a cliff overlooking the valley, Roman Dmitri watched the battle with cold, calculating eyes. Every movement below was a piece on a board he had already studied. He could see the flaw in Graxar's formation clearly. Because the fortress had fallen and the orcs believed Luna was defeated, they had placed all their elite troops at the front. Their rear was exposed, vulnerable, manned by weaker forces who never expected an attack. That arrogance was their greatest weakness. Roman stood with his cloak billowing in the wind and issued his orders. The Dmitri forces would continue their hit-and-run tactics, and the Luna soldiers would join them to execute every orc they could reach. By striking the rear, where power wasn't concentrated, they could reverse the numerical disadvantage and throw the enemy into chaos. The plan was simple, brutal, and effective. Below, Graxar roared in fury when news of the falling rear guard reached him. His rage was a physical force, boiling over as he realized his momentum was being disrupted. He screamed orders for the orcs to turn around and crush the pests at their back. Seeing the orcs react exactly as predicted, Roman allowed himself a faint, cold smile. He raised his hand with deliberate calm and gave the signal for the second phase of his plan. Desperate to regain control, the orcs mounted their snarling wolves and charged toward the rear, claws digging into ice as the beasts lunged forward. They funneled into a narrow mountain pass, the terrain forcing their formation to tighten and compress. As they entered the narrowest section of the pass, Roman's second operation began. Luna and Dmitri soldiers ambushed them from both sides, emerging from the shadows of the cliffs in a perfectly timed pincer movement. Rocks tumbled, blades swung, and the orcs, trapped in the cramped space, were helpless. Many were cut down in moments. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the human forces vanished again, using the North Sea Ice Palace's stealth techniques to melt back into the blizzard. The orcs cursed and bellowed, their wolves snapping at empty air. They tried to chase, tried to find tracks, but the wind had already erased every sign. The snow swirled and covered all evidence instantly. The remaining orcs moved forward again, but this time with caution, eyes darting toward every shadow and snowbank, the confidence they had carried now replaced by wariness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Luna soldiers watching from their positions felt relief bloom in their chests. Hope, fragile but real, flickered to life. They praised Seilin's martial arts openly, marveling at the technique Roman Dmitri had shared with them. That a human could possess such knowledge and that he would teach it freely to foreigners seemed almost miraculous. They whispered among themselves, wondering if Roman was something more than mortal. Behind the front lines, Graxar heard the commotion and turned, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. His instincts told him the enemy commander was no ordinary warrior. He could feel a strong aura somewhere in the distance, something vast and ominous, like a mountain hidden in mist. Were these strangers truly from beyond the endless range? Whoever they were dismantling his army piece by piece. Graxar knew he had to act personally if he wanted to turn the tide. The red aura around his body flared with renewed intensity, violent and oppressive. He appeared at the rear of his own forces with heavy footsteps that shook the ground. He ordered his troops to step back and not be drawn into the enemy's traps. He saw clearly now what was happening. A series of calculated provocations designed to pull his men into disadvantageous terrain. The orcs, despite their bloodlust, obeyed and cleared a path for their lord. Graxar charged forward, blade raised high, steel reflecting the dull grey sky. His movements seemed reckless, but his intent was focused entirely on drawing out the hidden leader. Then, without warning, a Dmitri soldier burst from the snow and struck at him. It was a bold, desperate move, a blur of motion against the white backdrop. Graxar blocked the swing, and the collision sent a visible shockwave rippling through the mountain, spraying snow in every direction. Graxar's arms trembled from the impact. He was shocked. This was no ordinary foot soldier. The attack had been amplified through perfect timing and use of terrain. The soldier knew he was dancing on the edge of a blade. One mistake, and he would be dead. Their swords clashed again, steel ringing sharp and discordant in the frozen air. Graxar studied the man and assumed he was the human leader. He challenged him to a duel, saying that if the human could defeat him, the Grey Wasteland tribe would admit defeat and withdraw. But then, from somewhere in the distance, a calm voice answered. It was steady, measured, and carried an edge that made the air feel heavier. The voice alone sent a chill down Graxar's spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He tightened his grip on his blade and demanded to know who spoke. A question flickered through his mind. Was the warrior before him not the human leader after all? Hearing the voice, the Dmitri soldiers smiled with quiet confidence. A figure emerged slowly from the thick snow, the wind dying just long enough for his silhouette to become clear. It was Roman Dmitri. He walked with a relaxed but predatory gait, eyes locked on the Orc Lord. As he stepped forward, the soldier who had been fighting Graxar quickly moved aside. Roman came to a stop and asked a simple question. If Graxar wins, what does he think will happen to those who followed Roman? Graxar answered that it would be up to the victor, a low, arrogant snarl. Roman nodded slowly and accepted the proposal, but added a warning. He wanted no misunderstanding about the consequences. If Roman won, he said, he would exterminate every orc who had used humans as food. His expression hardened into something terrifyingly absolute. He wasn't talking about winning a battle. He was talking about erasing orcs from the continent of Arcadia entirely. Graxar flared in rage, his pride wounded by the human's arrogance. He clutched his blade until his knuckles turned white and swore that if he won, he would trample Roman's homeland into dust. Without another word, both warriors swung their swords with full force. The collision was cataclysmic. A ripple of energy tore through the mountain range, sparks exploding from the clash of steel, bright enough to momentarily blind those watching. The sound was like thunder trapped in a canyon. Roman deflected Graxar's attack with fluid precision, guiding the orc's momentum away until the massive blade buried itself deep in the frozen ground. Graxar pushed himself to the limit, muscles bulging as he wrenched his weapon free. Their blades met again and again, sparking and ringing across the entire mountain range. They moved at terrifying speed, a dance of death almost too fast for the eye to follow. With every exchange, Roman's attacks grew harder for Graxar to handle. Each strike felt like being hit by a falling star. Graxar's mind reeled. He couldn't believe he was being pushed back by a human. He had spent his life crushing men beneath his heel, yet this man was different, stronger, faster, and utterly relentless. As their swords ground together once more, Roman asked mockingly if that was the best Graxar could do. His voice was steady, as if he weren't in the middle of a life-or-death struggle. Graxar roared and charged his aura even further, drawing upon every last drop of his strength. His body and blade glowed with crimson light so intense it turned the surrounding snow into a bloody mist. He questioned inwardly how such a monster could exist among humans. He had always seen humans as prey, weak and fragile, but Roman Dmitri was a predator of a much higher order, something beyond mortal limits. Roman decided to end it. He shifted his stance, and the pressure around him changed, becoming something ancient and overwhelming. He channeled the heavenly demon sword art, a technique that transcended the boundaries of mortal swordsmanship. With a single devastating stroke, he cut down the Orc Lord who had terrorized the entire continent of Arcadia. As Graxar fell, the crimson aura around him vanished like smoke. The only sounds left were the whistling of the wind and the soft, final thud of his body hitting the snow. The Orc Lord was dead. The silence that followed was profound. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a world that had just shifted on its axis. Graxar, the nightmare that had haunted Arcadia's frozen north, lay motionless in the snow. His reign of terror had ended not with a prolonged struggle, but with a single, perfect strike. Roman stood over the corpse, sword still in hand, his expression as cold and unreadable as the mountains around him. The soldiers, both Dmitri and Luna, stared in stunned silence, witnessing the fall of a legend and the rise of something even greater.